Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. The subject of today's video is once again something that I've decided to talk about based on this morning's Twitter interactions. And that's not necessarily what this YouTube channel is going to be, but at the same time I think it's quite a good idea to sort of talk from the heart and openly about specific things that are going on at that moment in time, rather than having this pre-designed idea that maybe feels a little bit stale. And the actual subject of today's YouTube video concerns Newcastle and Lewis Hall. The former Chelsea man has signed for Newcastle now. He's only 18, he made a handful of appearances for the Blues in the Premier League last season, and in my discussions with Chelsea fans as a Palace supporter who were heavily linked with a loan move across this season to Lewis Hall, everyone from a Chelsea perspective seems to suggest that he is going to be an absolute superstar, or at least that he has all of the attributes and potential to reach the very top of the game. I think, you can look at a whole host of different academy graduates that have come through Chelsea, some of whom have been on loan at Crystal Palace in the shape of Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Conor Gallagher, and they all obviously have a relatively higher ceiling. But from everything I have seen, Lewis Hall seems to be one of the most highly rated amongst Chelsea supporters, and with that in mind, a fair few of them are very frustrated to see that he has moved to Newcastle. And of course, now Newcastle are not the same club as they were 2 or 3 years ago. They are a genuine threat to Chelsea. They have Champions League football this season, they have a huge fan base, they have a big ground, they have all this momentum behind them, and the transfer itself really does feel like something of a line being drawn in the sand by the Toon Army. But the actual transfer itself is not really the reason for me recording this video today, and instead it's more of an examination of the way that Newcastle United are perceived now within the English game, because I tweeted this morning the official announcement video that brought everyone's attention to the fact that Lewis Hall had agreed to join Newcastle. And as part of the reading that I did when Crystal Palace were first linked with a loan move for Lewis Hall, I discovered, despite the fact that he was born in London, his father Colin was actually a native Geordie, and he had brought both he up and his brother to be Newcastle fans, which is, a little bit of a wrinkle, I suppose, something you wouldn't necessarily know without further reading, but it does inform this transfer to an extent. And the announcement video that Newcastle put up featured his father. It features pictures of him and his brother as young kids in Newcastle gear. And that in itself is quite a nice aspect to this story, because, as I said on Twitter this morning, you've got a father that has moved down to London and brought his 2 boys up to support the club that he grew up supporting, and now to see his own son sign for Newcastle United must be a feeling of unparalleled pride and joy for Colin, his dad. And that in itself felt like quite a neat thing to say, and as far as I was concerned, that was the end of it. But within 2 or 3 minutes there were a couple of comments, maybe more, about Newcastle being this PR exercise for the Saudi Public Investment Fund and how they were just part of a greater machine. And it got me thinking a bit more deeply than usual about the whole narrative around Newcastle United now, and quite where Newcastle fans are supposed to stand on it. Because Premier League football, and football generally really, is obviously the opium of the masses. That is the phrase that often gets trotted out, and quite rightly so. It is the modern religion. It's the place that everyone goes to forget their worries for 2 hours every weekend, and it occupies a huge part in so many people's lives from an emotional perspective. But Newcastle United as a club have become this hugely combustible discussion point because of the Saudi Public Investment Fund's whole situation, because of the regime that they represent, because of what Newcastle have invited in by taking them on as owners, because of the jubilation that Newcastle fans had when Mike Ashley was first out of the football club, and then that sort of push and pull between the moral codes of whether or not they should be truly happy to have the Saudi Public Investment Fund as their owners. And it does leave, from my perspective at least, their supporters in something of an impossible situation, because I look at my fandom of Crystal Palace, and I'm sure this is something that is replicated across the whole of the English game. I would not be comfortable with Crystal Palace being owned by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. It has all sorts of moral question marks around it, and those are there for all to see. But I'm not sure that it would stop me supporting the club. I'm not sure that it would stop me rejoicing when transfers were made. I'm not sure that it would stop me enjoying any run towards European competition. And that's where this ambiguity comes in for me, because I'm not sure that anyone should be berated for continuing to support their football club regardless of who is in charge. It's quite a simple perspective to have, I appreciate that, but you often do see immediately when anything positive ever happens with Newcastle now, you will have plenty of people jumping on their heads to say, how can you possibly morally square this away? How can you be happy with these people running your football club? But if you have grown up as a Newcastle fan, if you are part of that city, if you have gone there with your parents, with your cousins, with your uncles as a small child, and you have grown to love that club over a number of years, why should you stop supporting the club? You know, the well and long wheeled out point is that the supporters are the one constant with every football club. It's not players, it's not coaches, it's not managers, it's not even owners. It's the people that go and watch their team week after week. And we all know that Newcastle are a one club city. I've been there on 2 or 3 occasions, not just for football. I went there for my stag do a few years back, and it is a goldfish bowl of a place. You know, the stadium dominates the skyline. Everyone you see, well, not everyone, but a large number of the people that you see walking around the city centre are wearing Newcastle shirts or Newcastle gear. And, you know, it's not necessarily a suffocating thing, but it certainly feels like that entire area is fully bought into the club as a whole. And with that in mind, their general sense of joy at the newfound financial backing that they have has to be sort of tinged with a little bit of reluctance. But at the same time, I'm not sure that I can ever really beat them around the head for enjoying it, because what are they supposed to do? You know, all go and support Gateshead because they feel they've morally lost their football club? Or do they look at it and think, we weren't happy with Mike Ashley, but we had to put up with that. We didn't stop supporting the football club because of his questionable practices with Sports Direct. We protested against him. And the difficulty here comes, of course, and it will inevitably be a part of the reaction to this video, when people say, oh, you were protesting against him because he wasn't spending money on the football club. And that is a valid point to make, admittedly. But it's such a difficult thing, I think, to draw a line on, because I can tell you now, you know, I love Crystal Palace with every part of my being, and that will forever be the case. There have been questionable decisions made by owners in the past. You know, you may not have liked Mark Goldberg when he came in as owner. You might not have liked the way Simon Jordan went about things. It didn't stop you wanting to be a Crystal Palace fan. And admittedly, this is a slightly different animal, because you're looking at the Saudi Public Investment Fund and all of the moral question marks that come with that. But I just don't see a scenario where every Newcastle fan should be beaten around the head with the fact that their ownership are who they are whenever they have a moment to savour. And this Lewis Hall transfer really encapsulates that for me. You know, his father has been a Newcastle fan far longer than the Saudi Public Investment Fund have been interested or involved with Newcastle United. He and his brother have been Newcastle fans, even though they were based in London, for far longer than the Saudi Public Investment Fund have been interested and involved in Newcastle United. And you can guarantee that he, alongside his brother and his dad, will continue to be Newcastle fans for the rest of their lives, regardless of who owns Newcastle United. Now, I understand that you've got this PR exercise, it's soft power, it's a way for the Saudi Public Investment Fund to work their way into Western culture and make sure that they are embedded within an extremely widely watched product in the Premier League, and there comes with it all sorts of debates and arguments to be had. But, you know, I looked at that this morning even, and you can just boil it down, I think, to this desperation from some people to continue to bang that drum. And I understand it has to be something that Newcastle fans do take on board, and I think every single right-thinking Newcastle United fan understands that it is not a straightforward thing. They have to have a degree of understanding and trepidation about the overall moral line that they are treading. But at the same time, if you just enjoy going to St James's Park and following your club away from home, if you take great pride in the careers and stories of the likes of Sir Bobby Robson and Alan Shearer and Paul Gascoigne and Jackie Milburn, then, why wouldn't you be overjoyed at a player like Lewis Hall coming back to the club that his father supported and brought him up to support, without having to constantly field the moral question marks about the club as a whole? And, of course it comes with the territory. My other argument in all of this is, if they weren't successful, you wouldn't have the level of pushback that you are currently seeing. But, I say it all the time, the Premier League is littered with questionable moral billionaires. As far as I'm concerned, you don't become a billionaire unless you do straddle that moral line with all sorts of question marks over how exactly you got there. I appreciate this is a slightly different scenario because of the political backdrop to the Saudi Public Investment Fund, but let's not pretend that the Premier League as a whole is whiter than white. There is all sorts of question marks that could be had about pretty much every single ownership model within the league. So, I just wanted really to put on record the sort of sympathy that I have with Newcastle fans, because I don't think it's a particularly easy thing to sum up, but at the same time I do see the constant bagging of the anti-Newcastle drum and feel a genuine sense of empathy with their fans, because they will be there regardless, and they've turned out in huge numbers for many years. That's because it is a one club city and they do care deeply about it, and it's why they were so happy to get rid of Mike Ashley and then see some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of footballing success, even though, as I've just mentioned, a fair few of them, quite rightly, at the point when that deal was first made, highlighted that there were all sorts of moral ambiguities to go alongside it. So, it's not, once again, a groundbreaking opinion from me. I didn't think that Ange Postecoglou potentially guiding Spurs to the top four was a particularly controversial opinion either, given the reasons that I laid out in the video yesterday. But you will always inspire debate, and I appreciate that this particular topic is something of a political hot potato, so I'm expecting some degree of pushback. But I just wanted really to make that point that I do feel some sympathy with Newcastle fans, because what are they supposed to do? Just stop going and stop supporting their football club? Because you could go somewhere else and then immediately another questionable moral owner comes in and you're left in the same quandary. If you've been brought up to support a football club because it's your city, it's where you've, taken your first steps as a football fan, then really the ownership, as much as it is an important conversation and discussion point to have, should not be the be-all and end-all of your fandom of that particular football club. Hopefully that all makes sense. Hopefully you're not too angry and frothing at your screen having watched me discuss this for the last few minutes. If you have enjoyed the video, please do consider giving it a like and maybe pushing subscribe on the YouTube channel, because I am trying to grow it as quickly and as organically as possible. I know I keep on saying that, but it is a fact. And if you are interested potentially in a more overall roundup of everything that has gone on in the game over the previous 24 hours, Monday to Friday, the link to my Patreon is down below, £3 a month, and you get that delivered straight to your inbox by 8:30 every weekday morning. Other than that, hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.